Hi, everyone. It's great to be back with you again. And we've got a real treat in store today because I'm talking to Dr. Ben Brown, who's a naturopathic doctor, originally trained in Australia, but now resides over here for us in the UK, which we are very grateful for. So, Ben is the founder and director of the Nutritional Medicine Institute. It's an educational and advocacy and research group that's really committed to advancing the science and practice of nutritional medicine. He's also an internationally acclaimed lecturer. He's the host of the Positive Health podcast, and he's also on the academic advisory board and guest lecturer of the British College of Nutrition and Health. He also speaks at major conferences all around the world, so some of you may have been lucky enough to see him. But I've asked Ben to come and talk to us today because he is such a great communicator, and we are looking at the immune system today, not one of the easiest systems to get your head around. And I just really wanted Ben to help us distill this into the simplest form so that we can really have some practical things at our disposal for how we can affect and strengthen our own immune resilience going forward. I mean, we over here in the northern hemisphere, we're facing autumn and winter on the doorstep, and our immune resilience is going to be a really important factor. So Ben, hi, have I left anything out in your background?
No, it's wonderful. It's a really kind introduction, and I'm excited to just talk through this with you. It's a really pertinent and important topic for everyone. The pandemic's not going away. It's going to cycle seasonally by the looks of it, and understanding a bit about our own immune systems and how to increase resilience is really important.
That's great. Well, out of all the body systems, I understand why the immune system is the most difficult, because it's the one that you can't really see, you can't quantify, and it's got this almost existential effect that's happening in the background, isn't it? So can you give us a bit more information? Can you put it on the page for us?
Yeah. It's in fact, you've probably got a better idea than me with your background in psychoneuroimmunology, but I think you're absolutely right. And I think coming from you as someone who's studied this intimately is that it's wildly complicated. It's really difficult to get a handle on, and the immune system is really, really complex. But there are some take homes that I think, in terms of our understanding, that are really fundamental, simple, and can help inform us and sort of educate us on how it works, and also how often when we're talking about the immune system, we're not talking just about the immune system, because it's attached to everything else. And that's that sort of wider view of our biology as being not just compartmentalized systems, but an interconnected web of different things. And so we can kind of get into that, but really broadly, and quite simply, your immune system has evolved to protect you against infection and injury. That's its fundamental purpose. And arguably it's the most important system in our body from an evolutionary perspective. In fact, it's been argued by some evolutionary biologists that the whole purpose of our existence is to out evade viruses and bacteria. It's like an evolutionary arms race. And when you see complexity in our biological systems, it usually means that is really, really important if something's very complex. And the immune system is extremely complex, but we can distill it down into a few basic functions. And the first is innate immunity, and the second is acquired. And innate's really simple. It's the part of your immune system that just kicks into gear with no prior knowledge of what's happening and helps you fight an infection or injury. And then the acquired aspect of your immunity is the one that's learnt a response. So it's seen a pathogen or a problem before, and it has some memory, and it can then mount a response based on that memory. So the innate and acquired are really important sort of fundamental aspects of our immune system. And then another thing that's really important is this sort of background concept of inflammation, and that plays an important role in determining your resilience to disease, and including infection is your propensity for inflammation. And unfortunately, this is often associated with a high level of inflammation is associated with chronic disease. So, this is part of the reason why we're seeing such high susceptibility to um, more severe outcomes of infection in people with things like diabetes and heart disease and obesity. So, because they're all associated with immune dysfunction and inflammation. And then I guess the other big thing that is really important in terms of our understanding beyond innate and acquired and this inflammatory sort of background inflammatory response is the fact that our immune system is not an isolated system. It's interconnected with other aspects of our function and biology. So, a classic example of that is our nervous system, and that is psychoneuroimmunology. It's this understanding that our nervous system and our immune system are constantly talking to each other, and they actually share a lot of similarities. Like, you can make immune cells in your central nervous system from the same, from a different system and tissue. So they're kind of the same thing, and they're interconnected. And the same is true of things like your gastrointestinal system. A lot of immune cells sit within the gastrointestinal system and interact with gut bacteria and digestion, and that can influence your systemic, meaning your whole body immunity. And same is true of metabolic health, like things like insulin regulation and your cardiovascular system also determine the function of your immune system, or interconnected. So that's a bit of a download, but it's really simply pointing out there's different aspects: innate, acquired, inflammation, and this sort of systems view that we need to take into account when we're understanding our immune system.
That's really perfect. Thank you. And coming away from that complexity, the overarching meaning for me in the immune system is that it's seen us through evolution to where we are, and the fact that the species has survived means that we have something that is exquisitely intelligent, that is enabling us to move through all the changes we've seen in our world, from our hunter-gatherer days to where we are in this highly so-called civilized but industrialized world that we live in now, digitized, technological world, and our immune systems are still functioning. And so I would really like to convey to our listeners that your immune system deserves some trust, and you really need to understand that we're still here. And now what Ben and I would like to do is tease out some of these exquisite connections with nature, because we didn't have access to the things that we have access to now through evolution, and yet we have still managed to teach our immune systems and acquire more immunity, haven't we?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, if we didn't have a complicated, exquisite defense mechanism against pathogens, that we wouldn't have lasted 3 million years or whatever. It's a really intrinsic part of our survival, and I agree. I think in light of what's going on in the world today, is our immune system needs to be given a bit more credit and brought to the fore, and also we need to better understand what supports a healthy immune system. And this is one of the things that's really come to the forefront recently, is that there are modifiable things that we can do within our control that influence our resilience to infection. And I think the simplicity of that idea cannot be understated or over exaggerated, because it's absolutely crucial to understanding our resilience to potentially life-threatening disease. So the big question is then, well, what's modifiable and what can we do something about?
And is there a hierarchy to it, do you think? Is there a priority system?
That's a good question, actually. I've never thought of it as a series of priorities. Like it, I guess there probably is, but how do you rank that? I'm not sure. I just sort of think of things in a bit of a web-like fashion. So it's like they're all important in equal measure.
Well, let's build the web, so and because actually for different people, they're actually going to need to pull on, their priorities are going to be different, a different aspect of the web. So I mean, I really love that. So let's go for it, Ben. What are we going to put first on the web?
Yeah, well, let's start with nutrition because that's kind of my area
Yeah.
of expertise, and then I guess we can get into things like metabolic health and lifestyle medicine and aspects around that. But nu- the whole nutrition area in terms of determining resistance to infection is quite well established, and we've got a lot of more recent data coming out that's quite relevant to what's going on now. But basically, the background of this is that your immune system and your and nutrients are the same thing. Like, and I've often said, before this was all going on, is that basically you eat your immune system. Like your food is like an extrinsic part of your immune biology that incorporating into your body that determines your resilience to infection. So, the well, what do we know about that then is basically that a lot of immunological function is dependent on an adequate supply of nutrients. And what's really clear is that people who are at risk of inadequate supply or nutrient deficiencies or poor diets, or there are other reasons, are at increased risk for infectious disease. I mean, this is really clear in the scientific literature for many different illnesses. There are some nutrients that stand out more than others, but broadly speaking, we can relate this back to general nutrition and diet, and unfortunately, the study of infectious respiratory diseases has been quite neglected for many years because it's sort of been relegated to affecting mostly older age individuals. We don't really talk about it much. Things like heart disease and diabetes have had a lot more attention, but it's a huge cause of mortality and morbidity. So we are lacking a bit of research in this area related to nutrition, but there is a bit, and we can certainly see that things like a more healthful dietary pattern, like a Mediterranean style diet, for example, have been studied and do seem to decrease the incidence of infection. So, for example, there was a brilliant study that was done in just a group of children looking at the incidence of respiratory tract infections after they were instructed in eating a healthier diet, and it cut their risk of respiratory tract infections by about half. And that was with just a simple Mediterranean style dietary intervention, and cut their antibiotic use by about 60%. So then, based on this sort of thing, more recently, people have asked, well, would that sort of dietary pattern help, against SARS-CoV-2 or coronavirus or COVID-19, whatever you want to call it. And basically, it seems that it might. There was a group in Italy that looked at the association. So this is not an intervention study. It's just saying, well, asking a question really: do people who eat more healthfully have increased resistance to infection? And it seems that they do. So in this an Italian cohort, this was published in the journal Nutrients earlier this year, they basically found that people who reported eating a more traditional, more Mediterranean style diet, olive oil, loads of fruits and veg, all the good stuff, basically had a much lower incidence of confirmed illness from, COVID-19 versus control. So I'm not saying you can eat your way out of it, but it looks like it's really important as a factor that could determine resistance or resilience to infection. And adding to that evidence, we also have studies on multivitamins. So they're obviously supplements, but the way I look at multivitamin studies is like, we could have done that with food, but it's sometimes easier from a research or even clinical perspective just to give someone a multivitamin to correct multiple nutrient deficiencies. So for me, it has lessons in diet, but it was a study in multivitamins. And there have been several reports looking at the ability of multivitamins to reduce the incidence of infectious disease, and they seem to do the same thing, especially in older age people, especially when they're taken for a long period of time, and especially in people at high risk of multiple nutritional deficiencies. So I guess where all this points to is that like food is essential, and the nutrients it contains are essential for a healthy functioning immune system. And it seems that we have these sort of lines of evidence to show that actually doing something about it and eating more healthfully can have a significant impact on your resistance to infection.
Absolutely, because I mean, even if we're not looking at just respiratory illnesses, we know that the immune system is dependent on being fed by nutrients, and that nutrients are also cofactors in many of the cascade. The whole immune cascade has all of those, and so you know, the Mediterranean diet has something that not every diet has, and that's eating a rainbow. It's having all those colors. So I think, you know, the colors deliver secondary plant metabolites as well. These plant chemicals are really important for immune function. And obviously you've got high healthy fats, you've got very fresh proteins if you're eating animal proteins, and you don't have a lot of junk food. So we're back to minimally processed or unprocessed whole food, lots of color, high healthy fats, you know, good quality protein, and you've suddenly got a diet of origin as well. If we're looking back towards our evolutionary times, you know, that is what nature delivered to us. We were eating, you know, lots of leafy greens. We had color when we had color. And I think, again, you know, the clue is always, what did nature give us? What was available before? Because that's what our immune systems have developed on and learned on, you know, on a genetic blueprint kind of basis. So, okay, we're taking our web. Nutrition, what you can eat, that is completely under everyone's control. And it's also why people like us have just been wanting to scream, because you've just mentioned some incredible studies. Why has there been no top-down messaging while people have been sitting at home in lockdown about what to do with their diet?
I don't know, but I think it's a tragedy that it hasn't happened, and I can't explain it. You know, I spend most of my time reading research, and there's an abundance of it, and much more related specifically to COVID-19 since this happened, really pointing out that some key nutrients in particular are really important for reducing risk. Do we hear about that research? Hell no. And I think it's a real crime against humanity that this research isn't being translated into public health messages. Why? You know, your guess is better than mine, but you know, it feels quite sinister, and I just think it's a huge disservice to humanity, and we've probably lost a lot of life because of it. So, you know, it's hopefully it comes out of the woodwork and gets more attention with time. But you know, I was quite optimistic at the start of all of this that message would have shone through, but it hasn't really, which is very sad.
And I think that's the other message as well, is that our immune system is very high tech, but it doesn't need tech. You know, when we go through this web, what we're going to look at is that, you know, when the things that we put together that are within our control are actually what we need for a really resilient, well-functioning immune system, and it's not rocket science. So that's great. What's our next stop on the web?
we can run through I guess while we're on the theme of nutrition, we could run through a couple of like individual micronutrients if you want.
That would be useful to do that now. Can I just say that, you know, there's often skepticism or a bad press around supplements, but you know, the European definition of a food supplement is actually very helpful, because it is just a concentrated source of nutrients in dose form. It is food in a dose form, and sometimes when you want a lot of a nutrient from a food and you can't eat that amount in the food, it's very useful to just take it in a supplement form.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would emphasize too that I've always food first. I do have a bias because I've worked in the supplement industry for years, but I hope that doesn't cloud better judgment, that it's at the bottom line is it's all about, you know, food. And but I agree with you. I think really what we're talking about here is just a concentrated source of nutrients from food generally, and they do have a place even on the background of healthy diets. I think that's fairly clear for not only correcting deficiencies, but also for optimizing intake beyond what's achievable with food. And, this is, something that, I wanted to mention. You mentioned earlier this sort of background evolutionary intake of plant foods. And while you were articulating that, it reminded me of the work of Linus Pauling, the two-time Nobel Prize laureate, who was somewhat controversial because of his work with supplements. And he wrote some brilliant papers based on evolutionary theory around optimal nutrient intakes. And his work on vitamin C is perhaps most infamous, but he predicted, based on historical sort of pre-agricultural intakes of food, that our vitamin C intakes are, in the order of magnitude of several grams, which is just unachievable with the food that we eat today, but would have been fine for a hunter-gatherer. They would have not even thought about it, obviously, but they had this sort of natural exposure. And I think for me, that's always a great example of, where and why sometimes these things are useful for optimizing intake beyond what we could even achieve with food.
And when you look at the fact that vitamin C is absolutely critical for its antiviral function, you understand why nature delivered it in those levels. And viruses, then you can wipe out a number of viruses by just taking vitamin C every day. Yeah. So one of the what I was suggesting last year is something that Dr. Sarah Myhill in the UK had advocated for, and that is just putting 5 grams of vitamin C in 1.5 litres of water and drinking it through the day. And if you want to take a bit extra, if you were unwell, you could obviously top that up. But just to keep your background level up, just revs up your immune system a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely, and it is like that. And from a historical perspective, the humans have evolved not to produce vitamin C because we used to eat so much, right? And now we don't. Scurvy is fairly rare, which is a severe deficiency disease, but suboptimal intakes are not. So in high risk groups like smokers, diabetics, depressed patients, people in hospitals, older age groups, like the sort of arguable level of deficiency in these groups is around 30 to 40% of these populations. So it's just kind of, we need to be thinking about nutrients a bit differently. And this old sort of argument that you can get everything you need from food is just really old and boring, and we need to move on from it.
Oh, we do. Patrick Holford's whole vitamin C for COVID campaign actually sprung out last year, of the fact that the US doctors that he was liaising with in the ICUs over in America were testing, and they were finding that the really serious cases in the ICUs were down at scurvy levels of vitamin C. And for something that is so simple to just be, it's cheap as chips, isn't it, to get vitamin C as a supplement. So I would urge everyone, it should be part of your medicine cabinet, but also just your kitchen cupboards, really.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I think the work that Patrick's done's excellent and brave. His seminal paper in the journal Nutrients really collaborated with some of the best scientists globally in this field, including Anita Carr, and it's really impressive. And, the work they're doing to sort of bring this to the fore and to people's attention is really important. But I think the take home is really simple: is it's cheap, it's safe. Linus Pauling was onto something. It definitely is important for immunological defense. And we know, although the effects are modest in things like colds and flu, it does reduce risk of infections. This is really clear. There are systematic reviews proving this, but it's probably better for certain subsets of the population than others, i.e. people who are deficient. And it does also have benefits of, things like complications of lower respiratory tract infections like pneumonia. So it's, it is really important. And, yeah, and just so simple and cheap and safe. It's, you know,
It's great. I think, people are often looking for the sexy new magic bullets, aren't they? But we're talking about our immune systems here, and
right.
they've evolved over a very long time. So while we look at nutrients, what are your other top sort of immune nutrients that are kind of safe, effective, that we know, drive better function?
Yeah, I think the way you put it's really great is that, we're talking about fundamentals, and that's kind of often the way I look at things is I think about fundamentals first. I know there are a lot of whiz bang sort of immune boosting formulas and herbs and mushrooms and things like that, but I tend to think, well, what do we know about food? What do we know about essential vitamins and minerals first, and start there. So with that in mind, I think there are a few things that really stand out in the literature as being important. Vitamin C or ascorbic acid is one of them. And by the way, you can get a lot of ascorbic acid from food if you want. One of the best sources for listeners is kiwi fruit, which incidentally, there was a clinical study in older age people where they gave them 4 kiwi fruit a day over winter, and that resulted in a significant reduction in infections because it's chock full of vitamin C, and they're full of lots of other good things as well. But it's like it's great vitamin C supplement basically, and it tastes better than ascorbic acid powder.
I want
Um,
to ask you about that, Ben. Do you recommend any of the other ascorbates to try and? I mean, do you think that there's an issue with ascorbic acid with a teeth enamel or anything else? Is there?
Personally, I don't. I don't think it matters too much what you take. I think in general, just plain ascorbic acid is fine. If you're taking higher amounts of it, maybe get some buffered vitamin C if you think you feel better taking that. But I don't think there's a big difference amongst sources, so I don't really care too much. There might be a slight advantage to taking liposomal vitamin C, but I'd say I think it's fairly minimal, and you can achieve similar things by just taking gram doses of
Mhm.
plain vitamin C. And then, obviously there's intravenous, but that's a whole different kettle of fish because the amount that's achieved systemically from intravenous is a bit different. But just talking about orally, I don't think the form matters too much personally. And a lot is made around better absorption and things, but I have not seen anything to suggest there's any significant difference amongst forms or whether you have bioflavonoids or whether it's natural or not.
Interesting. Okay.
But
I think it's worth just saying that vitamin C uh, is is excreted. It's just if you don't use it, if you don't need it, your body will just get rid of it. So there's no danger of overloading. And if you do hit what we practitioners call bowel tolerance, you will know when you've hit that. And that is the only symptom you'll have is a slightly loose bowel, and you can back it off. But if you are unwell and you are dealing with a virus, you will be able to take much more vitamin C because it will be in demand in your body, and bowel tolerance will be much further away than you would normally reach it.
yeah, that's right. It is very benign even at high doses. There's no real side effects apart from gastric upset in some people. So you're right.
So then, if we were to join that with some of our, I guess we'd be looking at vitamin D, we'd be looking at zinc. Is there anything else that you would put into that sort of most basic essential nutrients?
Yeah, I think they're really good places to start. Is basically from what I've seen emerge as really important is vitamin C, zinc, vitamin D. Omega-3 fatty acids, I would argue, are quite important as well. They seem to play a sort of key role in protecting people. And the other thing that's worthwhile mentioning is N-acetylcysteine as just a simple, low-cost way to sort of build immune resilience.
So
Um,
that's
yeah,
just called NAC. And obviously, if you are on the other side of the pond, you are now having a slight difficulty in obtaining NAC, or you maybe very soon. But it is worth finding a source of that. I would love you to just tell us a little bit more, because I think it's one of those incredibly special nutrients.
Yeah, I love it. And in fact, a colleague of mine and I published a paper in the journal Nutrients looking at glutathione metabolism and covering things like NAC, which is, it's one of its most important roles biologically. But it's such an interesting nutrient, and I've always liked it clinically because it's so low cost and so useful. It's one of its main uses is that it helps increase a substance in the body called glutathione. So there's this sort of master compound that you want a lot of. Basically, you don't want low glutathione, but your body normally makes it. It makes it partly from NAC. So all you're doing is giving your body the foundation it needs to make the stuff. And glutathione has a lot of different functions, but one of them is that it's a very potent antioxidant. It also is a very important sort of antiviral, antimicrobial as well, because of its relationship with the immune system. And it's also an excellent anti-inflammatory. It has all these really remarkable and important beneficial functions. And what NAC does is sort of elevates that. So within a few days of taking NAC, your glutathione, especially if it's low, will increase to a more optimal level. And that has a whole host of different benefits in many different areas. But in the context of infection and the immune system, it's fairly clear. It helps protect against infections. It reduces buildup of mucus as well. So it helps thin out excessive mucus if you have a respiratory tract infection, which is kind of handy. And it also protects like your lung epithelial cells as well. We've known this for many years. And there's a bit of human clinical research on it as well. So there are a few studies where they've investigated the ability of NAC to reduce the risk of infection in high-risk people, so in people with lung disease and in older age individuals. And what they've generally found in all the little studies that have been done is that it offers really good protection. It seems to bolster your immunity. It significantly reduces risk of infection. Yeah, it's just really, really useful. So that's kind of the background.
And that's another one, isn't it? That we really want to drive a higher level, and it's not so easy to get the levels that we need out of food.
Yeah, that's right. It would be quite difficult to increase glutathione in the same way from food that you can from NAC, and certainly as quickly. You can arguably do it, but it's a bit more complicated. Whereas this is just a very simple, quick way to boost your glutathione rapidly, and it's pretty inexpensive and very, very safe as well. There's no real risk of any side effects of NAC at the doses that are generally recommended.
And I think I'm right in saying that there's evidence emerging now as well, is that NAC may be very helpful in stopping the spike protein from adhering and being able to cause as much damage as we were seeing last year.
Yeah, it's possible. I'm not really familiar with that research, but it definitely elevated glutathione plays a really important role in protecting against infection in general. So it's certainly would be at the top of my list of things to consider. And prior to the pandemic, I had advised people just to use it as a prophylactic through winter anyway, because it's a very simple, easy thing to take. And seems to protect high-risk people against infection. So yeah, definitely worthwhile. And the cool thing with all of these nutrients is that you're supporting your own immune defenses, right? It's not that the nutrient has some miraculous properties. It's supporting your immune system's own ability to do its job, a bit better, basically.
I love that. But I'm all for empowered self-care, because I think that healthcare really begins at home, and we have the ability to make our bodies flourish and work as the incredible organisms they're meant to. We shouldn't wait and have somebody dictate that to us when it's broken down. We need to be creating health on a daily basis.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's one of the things that, as we mentioned, is sadly being lost at the moment is this idea that there's a lot of modifiable risk factors for viral infection and that we can be doing something about. But unfortunately, no one's really talking about this stuff. Nutrients and diet have been sidelined. And, the fact that most people, who are dying from COVID-19 are high risk, metabolically unhealthy people doesn't seem to be getting a lot of attention. So what are we doing about type 2 diabetes? And what are we doing about obesity as a public health preventative strategy, for improving population resilience? Bloody nothing. It's a bit tragic.
It's tragic. I think the thing is that we've got to move away. I totally understand the body positive movement, and I am someone who's been very ill in my life, and as a result of my autoimmune disease, I became morbidly obese. So I really understand on a very, very deep personal level. It caused a nervous breakdown. It was a really challenging time for me, and then to have come back from that level of metabolic disturbance to have a body that is fully functioning again. I can only implore people to kind of engage with that, because the process of becoming vitally healthy again is a really good one. And I hope that we can take another step now and realize that this is not demeaning or discriminating or being nasty to people who are full of body, but it's actually about wanting them to have this experience of health that actually is better for mind and emotions and the way you feel and the way you function. And so again, that conversation, as you say, is not happening, but we've been handed on a plate. It's like someone on high is saying, look, this has really got to be dealt with now.
Mhm.
So we've taken nutrition. Nutrition is the basis of dealing with metabolic disturbance as well.
Yeah.
We're not going to get into that whole side of it today, but if we now move from nutrition and we start looking at some of these other things in the web that influence our immune system, the amazing thing as well, which is exquisite, is they also influence metabolism. So the two are, as you started off saying, are really entwined.
Yeah.
Where should we go next? Should we talk about stress and sleep and mindfulness and relaxation, or where do you want to go?
Yeah. I mean, that's a
I don't want to leave without talking about the gut as well.
cool. Yeah, I mean, I think just putting that metabolic health thing to bed as we move into other lifestyle factors, I just want to, emphasize how important that is. And, one of the tragedies at the moment is we understood very early on in the pandemic that the people at risk were diabetic, hypertensive, overweight, etc. And it just seems to not be really given much attention as an important factor related to resilience. I think it's a great tragedy, because many of these things, as you mentioned, they're difficult and they're complicated in the context of obesity, but there is also, and I'm not saying we can wave a magic wand and cure these things, but there is hope in some cases that these things can be really managed well and sometimes reversed. And I mean, if you look at the work Dr. David Unwin's doing here in the UK, they've just reached 100 confirmed cases. This is just a single private practice not even in a major city, where they're treating patients with diet, with type 2 diabetes, and reversing it. So they've just reached 100 patients who are now off medication and diabetes and drug free with food. And it's like, why aren't we rolling that out at a population level in every doctor's surgery in the clinic with a nutritional therapist? Because it.
Well, I think we know the answer. I think the answer is going to hit some big companies in the pocket, really.
Yeah, and it's just an acknowledge. Yeah, there's so many things going on there, but it just seems to me like a massive wasted opportunity. I would love to know, like, what the change in susceptibility to infection is in that group, but there you go. But sort of moving on from metabolic health, and taking it out into a bigger picture, which is all sort of part of the same web anyways. You mentioned a few things that are, really important is this sort of bigger picture lifestyle medicine and environmental medicine perspective on the immune system. And it's definitely true that these things in our environment influence immune function. So sleep is a great example. Exercise is another one. So there is probably less for sleep that I'm aware of, but certainly for exercise, it's quite clear that advice and instruction for people to exercise more frequently increases their resilience to respiratory tract infections. That's been known for some time. There's also a psychosocial aspect as well. So there was some brilliant work done here by a group in the UK some years ago, and what they were looking at is things like, how many friends people have and their social interconnectedness. And basically, the more interconnected people are, the less stressed they become, the more resistant to infections they become. This is all, it sounds a bit hippy trippy, but it's all published research.
But it makes sense. We used to live in communities.
Yeah, right. And
we took care of our tribe. We were. It took a village to raise children. There was.
Yeah. Right. And your nervous system is your immune system. So if you're stressed and socially isolated, you're going to be immunosuppressed and not functioning as well as you could be. So it all makes sense when you start thinking about it logically like that. And then there's another big one that I know the guy, you and the team at ANH are into. It's like nature therapy, right? So
big time.
It turns out that spending time in green space or nature or blue space or whatever you want to call it, there's all different types of space. But basically being outdoors in nature has a profound effect on your immune system. Now, I don't know for sure if it's been shown clearly to reduce resistance to infection, but it definitely influences immune function. So, things like nature therapy will lower inflammatory biomarkers and improve measures of immune function, resilience. Like this has been known for ages. You just need to look at the work out of Japan on, forest bathing, and, their studies are exquisite, like looking at how time in nature influences immunity and function. And they were really the seminal papers, but that's since been replicated all over the world. And
it is so topical because just last week I talked to Gary Evans of the Forest Bathing Institute, and so we've put all that out. And
cool.
I said at the time that engaging in Shinrin Yoku sounds way more enhancing than forest bathing, but it's the same thing, and it does mean get outdoors. And if you can do your exercise outdoors, you get all those benefits, plus a lowering of your inflammation as well. Amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. It's hugely important, but again, it's just overlooked. It sounds too simple, as you put it, like our immune system doesn't need high-tech interventions. Some of the most effective things arguably are really low-tech, simple, accessible things like food, nutrients, social connection and time outdoors. And they sound too simple. We need some sort of high technology drug or medical discovery, but actually all of these things have a profound influence on immune function. They all influence immune resilience, and there's something we can all access right now. So.
And then, of course, the list that you've just given us there, I'm sure everybody is thinking about the last 18 months and what we've had to do. We've been socially isolated. We've been nuking our microbiome with all of the anti-bac products. We've been reducing our oxygen intake. We've been breathing in too much carbon dioxide as a result. And we've been eating a load of the wrong foods. We've been drinking far too much alcohol. Imagine if the UK had been in the same boat as South Africa, where they stopped the sale of alcohol and cigarettes for the whole of the lockdown. It doesn't bear thinking about. But all of those things together, and you just think, you couldn't be more diametrically opposed to what our immune systems are actually asking for, could you?
Yeah, that's right. It's definitely a handicap, and I think it's really difficult for people right now to adopt some of the things we're talking about because we've been in this state for 18 months or something. And you're right, like a lot of these liberties arguably have been taken away, and these positive influences on our health. So it's pretty clear that this has had a negative impact, and I think it can be extra challenging right now for people to sort of take back their health, but it's not impossible. And
We were still allowed out, so that's the thing, is that we were so lucky that we were still allowed out to exercise. But I just wonder how many people actually took the opportunity to get out and do that every day. Rob and I certainly did, but just when you know the benefits, you kind of feel like you're going to be destroyed if you're not having that every day.
yeah, absolutely. And maybe that should have been the message. It shouldn't have been that you're allowed out a bit. It should be like you have to get out and do something because it increases your resistance to infection. But no one was saying that, and you're right on the alcohol sales and the poor quality food. And it's they should have been public health messages as well, but they really haven't been part of the narrative. So this idea that there are other modifiable things that influence our resilience to infection has just sort of been lost. And what we're talking about it is that, but that message needs to get out.
So before we close, I'd really love to just close on the note talking about the microbiome, because we understand so much more about the microbiome now, but even that is just a tiny scratch of the surface. But in terms of the microbiome and the immune system, I think that is still not as well understood. So we've talked about diet from the nutrient side of it, but could you just give us a little bit on the microbiome and how that relates to the immune function?
Yeah, I love this stuff, and I wrote a book on digestive health and have published a little bit of work. And the more I understand about digestive health, the more I don't understand, basically. And I think that's where we're at with the microbiome. Is like anyone who says they understand it doesn't know what they're talking about, and using it sort of it's really difficult. So it's wildly complex. But the one of the things we do know for sure is that it's inherently vital to have a healthy microbiome for a healthy immune system. And the reason for that is really simple, is that a large part of your immune system sits around your gastrointestinal tract, whereas the majority of your microbes they're not just there, they're everywhere, all over your skin right now, which sounds a bit creepy, but they're there, and all through all through your gastrointestinal tract. And they're interacting with your immune system all the time, and they're absolutely vital for a healthy immune system. There was a great book title called The Epidemic of Absence. And basically it is pointing to this idea that, we're the sterilization generation, right? So we were the ones who were exposed to antibiotics and antimicrobials, and germs are bad. And, we've turned full circle on that now. We now know that a lot of germs are really good for us, and these microbes in our gut are good for us, but it's kind of a little bit late. We've probably resulted in a mass extinction of microbes because of the lifestyle and the exposures that we've had. But what does that all mean at a practical level? It basically means that healthy microbes in your gut are really important for a healthy immune system. But then the big question is well, how do you encourage healthy microbes? And when I first got into this field, years ago, our thinking around it was so simplistic. It was like, take a probiotic, that'll fix everything, and off you go. But now we know that doesn't even work. Like, probiotics don't fix everything. In fact, they do almost nothing long term to your gut microbiome. It's much more complicated, and it hangs on your environment and lifestyle. And where it's sort of getting now with the microbiome is almost like esoteric. Like, I've heard microbes being referred to as universal consciousness because their memory that connects us to our environment, because there's interconnections of communication there, and they carry that memory across generations long after we're gone. So it gets kind of weird, but from a practical level, what we understand now is that basically everything in your diet and environment influences your microbiological health. So, forget this idea of probiotics. Like, they're great and they're really useful for some things, but they're not going to change your microbiome. Forget the idea of eating high fiber diets. Like, that was so 70s, but it doesn't, it helps a little bit, but it doesn't do much for the overall picture. And forget the idea of just food. Like, food is important, but it's not just about food. It's about environmental exposures, like this time in nature and connection with other people and even animals. Like, if you own a dog, you share microbes, and that's probably a good thing.
But we share microbes with people too.
Yeah,
And
right.
that's,
Yeah. Yeah, it's cool. It's fun to talk about that. Where it's all gone is much bigger picture, I think. And if we just focus on the simple things for people, like food, basically everything you eat influences your microbiome. It's not just fiber anymore, not just probiotics, not fermented foods. It's absolutely everything, like vitamins, amino acids, fatty acids, phytonutrients. Like, everything has a significant impact. So it's all, what does that mean then? It means that the whole of your diet needs to be healthy and diverse, because everything in that influences your microbiome. So that's probably a big takeaway. And the other thing is just a healthy, environment with good social connection and time outdoors and nature, and time in the backyard or gardening if you can. These things, coming in contact with microbes, are really important as well. And this probably puts your immune system in really good stead. And that's kind of where we're at with the microbiome, and a key take home, I think.
and as Ben said earlier, we've got a very strong microbiome on our skin, which is really important, and there for very good reason. And so it is one of the reasons why I don't use any antibacterial products at all, because soap and water is absolutely fine, and I don't want to upset the microbiome on my skin. So I know that might be controversial for people, but honestly, do think about the actions that you're taking when you're asked constantly to be squirting yourself with anti-bac products. And so, Ben, have you got any other final thoughts, top tips
Yeah, I think
immune resilience?
no, I think I'd wrap up where we started, and that is, for me, one of the most important ideas to get across with this discussion is that there are modifiable risk factors for viral illness. So there are things that influences our susceptibility to disease. It's not, viral illness is not just like this deadly miasma that indiscriminately affects everyone the same way. There are things that determine our resilience, and there are things that we can do something about in most cases, optimizing our nutrition, influencing our intake of micronutrients, or optimizing it, looking at our metabolic health and considering, better blood pressure management or diabetic control, etc. And then lifestyle changes like exercise and time in nature, and grounding yourself in the importance of the mind-body connection and stress reduction and social connectedness, and spiritual pursuits, or whatever it is for you. And these things are almost they just sound too simple. So I think the idea is, like, people are dismissing it, but they're incredibly important. And if all you need to do is look at something like vitamin D as an example, like the effect of vitamin D on outcomes from severe illness, it's just striking. Like, you can't mess with that. It has a really potent disease risk modifying effect, and that's what we're really talking about here, is a web of different things that are actionable, that each of us could look at. They'll be different for everyone, as you mentioned, but they're important. And I think that's the take home, is that it's not just us versus the bug, and it's not that simple. That it's us and our environment and our lifestyle, and those things influence this beautiful immune system we all own, that then determines our resilience.
That's wonderful, absolutely. And my last 2 points that came to mind while you were talking is that is to not fear viruses. We have a virome as well within. We have viruses in our microbiome. We've evolved alongside them. And the other side is that also not to be frightened of illness, because our immune system, the whole point of having a resilient immune system is that it can act when it needs to. So you may get sick. We've all grown up like that. We've had the flu. We've had colds. We've had coughs. But the idea is that you have a resilient enough immune system that nukes the bad guys and allows you to bounce back again, and return your health. So Ben, thank you so very much for your time. In the article that's going to accompany this, and all the links below, we will point people towards your Positive Health podcast, and your website. And I'm presuming that your books are on your website, or are they somewhere else?
Yeah, they are. Yeah, yeah.
Okay. So we will put as many links as we can so that people can find you and can carry on with this. But incredibly grateful for your time today. Thank you so much.
No, it's a pleasure. It's been a really good discussion, and thank you and the team at ANH for all the incredible work that you do. It's never been more important, and I'm just happy to be able to pitch in and help.
Thanks.